For more, we can bring in France 24's tech editor, Julia Seeger. Good to see you, Julia. What are some of the more explosive revelations from her testimony?
So there are many takeaways from the Facebook papers, but first we learn, for instance, that Facebook actually created this secret tier-based system to designate which countries should get the most resources to try to moderate content ahead of local elections. So first of all, in the highest priority, in the tier 0, you'll find the United States, Brazil, and India. And there, Facebook really set up war rooms, monitored the network continuously, increased moderation, but also was in close contact with local authorities. Then you'll find Germany, Indonesia, Iran, Israel, and Italy that were placed in the tier 1, followed by tier 2 with 22 other countries. And tier 3 is literally the rest of the world, where there Facebook only reviews election-related material only if it's escalated to them by moderators. The problem is that it actually decided to allocate these means without even fully understanding the potential impact it could have on local communities. And this is why Facebook today is accused of perhaps sparking violence because of the lack of moderation in certain countries like Ethiopia and Burma, for instance, in 2018. Now, what's more is that this moderation problem is really at the forefront of the Facebook papers. We learned that the AI algorithm actually doesn't work that well when it comes to moderating other languages than English. And also that there's a problem because there are few moderators in certain languages. For instance, in Arabic, there's a lot of different local dialects. But for instance, in Yemen and in Iraq, there aren't any moderators whatsoever. In Burma, during the spat of violence in 2018, they only had 2 moderators speaking the local language. Now, we also learned that Mark Zuckerberg himself actually decided to cave to censorship demands from the Vietnamese government to try to silence anti-government activists. He also personally authorized, for instance, to put back online some content that was deemed fake, that was taken off the platform, where he allowed to put it back on the platform under the pressure of U.S. representatives.
Now, it also shows that Facebook failed to address the spread of far-right groups like Stop the Steal, and it left the scrambling to implement emergency measures on January 6th when the movement, really hit when we saw the thing at the U.S. Capitol.
Exactly. What we learn in these papers is that they had put together these safeguard mechanism right before the elections in November 2020, and the idea was to try to counter misinformation ahead and immediately after those elections. And despite warnings from employees, they decided to dismantle it right after the elections, and this is why they were taken aback on January 6th when the Capitol was stormed. Now, Facebook also researched, and this is very important, the impact of its like button, its share button, but also its group features, and it concluded in its internal report that it's actually the core product mechanism that actually allowed the spread of misinformation and hate speech to really flourish on its website. And despite those conclusions, they decided not to act on it, and therefore the platform's core experience actually never changed.
And what's very shocking as well is that the company knew about human trafficking activities but decided not to act.
Exactly. Since 2018, Facebook actually knew about human traffickers using the platform, especially Messenger, to not only sell but also buy workers. This is what we actually learn in internal documents. And it's only in 2019 when Apple threatened to take Facebook and Instagram off the App Store, they decided to act, saying that this they really needed to avoid what they described at the time in an internal document as potentially severe consequence for the business. Now, another important revelation here is also about the algorithm itself. As I explained, it's promoted toxic and hateful content. For instance, it's given 5-star points to post with emojis with angry and sadness, but on the other hand, only 1 point for posts with likes and positive emojis. Now, what's interesting is that the algorithm itself also seems to be out of hand, and engineers seem to have lost control over it. So, for instance, the news items that you have on your feed, for instance, they actually have an engagement rating, and the reason why they appear on your feed is because they have a high score. Well, certain misinformation or fake news actually got these really high ratings, and when engineers tried to manually change that score, they weren't able to take it off the platform, meaning that the AI has almost become stronger than the engineers.
So it's doing its own thing.
Its own thing.
I'm one of those people who do not get my news off of Facebook, but I know that surprisingly, a large number of people do. Now, obviously, Facebook is denying all these accusations.
Of course, Mark Zuckerberg, which is, Facebook is actually going to change its name in just a couple of days, but he has denied, of course, the fact that he's valued profit over public safety. He's emphasized the effectiveness, of course, of all of the safeguards, and he's claimed that the leaked documents only represent a cherry-picked negative view of the company, which is true as well. I mean, Facebook does allow a lot of people throughout the world to also communicate and stay in touch. But the company spokesperson has also said that they've actually hired 40,000 people and they've invested $13 billion just to increase the safety of users on Facebook.
And the company posted its profits recently, and
And
they
it's
were
still
good.
doing very well.
Still doing very well, despite everything. Thank you very much for that, Julia. Julia Seeger there from Tech24.